it's a bit unwieldy. You could, shatter your eye socket if you drop it on yourself while reading in bed, but it's worth the risk. Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Bren Booth Jones. Today I'm going to talk about one way in which you can build a comprehensive library with a relatively small amount of money. One of the ways in which you can do this is to collect omnibuses. Now, by an omnibus, I don't mean an anthology, which contains various writings by a range of contributing authors. Just to take probably the most obvious example, the Norton Anthology of English Literature, right? Now, this is actually a wonderful addition to your library, and maybe we can talk about, in fact, we are going to talk about that in another video, but I'm talking about omnibuses. And so an omnibus is not an anthology in that sense. There are two kinds of omnibuses, though, that I want to mention. And the first kind of omnibus is a collected works of, or complete works of. And these are great. I'm going to show you some of these today from my own collection. This is sort of at the end of a very esteemed writer's life. Their publisher will bring out a very magisterial, weighty tome, with all of their published poetry collections or novels. Often they are quite seriously scholarly. So you have the complete works or collected works of, but you also have this more humble omnibus. Quite often omnibuses are just sort of a handful of complete books, whether that's novels or nonfiction or poems. A handful of them, sometimes, probably not less than 4, but sometimes as many as 7 or 8 books by an author in one big, hefty volume, doorstopper of a volume. Why are these worth collecting? There's 2 big benefits to collecting omnibuses. First of all, that you can get good value for your money. You can buy one omnibus of Jane Austen, the complete novels, for around $20 or €20, and you will have her 6 major novels, plus possibly a few extra bells and whistles, right? So you actually get more literature for less, which is one big benefit. And then secondly, and this is really important, often you can find omnibuses, especially second-hand omnibuses, that have out-of-print works in them. So I will show you some examples of that as well. So yeah, those are 2 major reasons to collect omnibuses. Often these can be picked up secondhand. I have got dozens of omnibus books in my library. I had a lot of fun ranging around the house collecting these massive dusty tomes, and I picked out 10 omnibuses to share with you today. Huge, beautiful, affordable, enriching, dazzling, exciting, surprising, miscellaneous, cornucopia, cacophony of omnibuses. So I'm going to do these in roughly chronological order, and there's only one place to start here, and that is the complete works of William Shakespeare. This is an Abbey Library edition, but this complete works has been published many times, many different editions, and you can pick these up surprisingly cheap. Garage sales on eBay, flea markets. You'll be surprised. I think that sometimes these, spent 30, 40 years or maybe 100 years as literal doorstoppers, which is sacrilegious for us with a literary bent. But nonetheless, I managed to get my hands on this baby. Look at this. Obviously, pretty much all of Shakespeare is in print, although some of the poems, his long narrative poems, are not so easy to come by. But I think with this omnibus, this complete works, it's more of a reference because it's quite dangerous to lay in bed, for example, reading the complete works of Shakespeare. So this one for me as an omnibus, it was dirt cheap, and it's a timely reminder to read and reread Shakespeare. And I've got loads of Shakespeare and loads of different editions. So this is more of a pride of place, a kind of cornerstone of my library, not one that I actually use in a practical sense unless I'm looking something up. Next, I've got another quite old, our beloved romantic Keats. poetical works, and we've got a nice introduction and prefatory notes, and we've got a bit of Keats's life, and then all of the poems, the sonnets, shorter poems, the Fall of Hyperion, posthumous and fugitive pieces. It's a lovely hardcover, and really wonderful to have the grandiloquently titled poetical works. Next, we're going to jump forward to Oscar Wilde, the complete illustrated stories, plays, and poems. Now this, even though it is chunky, it's not as unwieldy as it looks. And I have actually read, whereas the complete works of Shakespeare is something more of a reference to dip in and out of, and a sort of placeholder, a kind of cornerstone of the library. The Oscar Wilde is one that I actually have read directly out of, although I do have pretty much everything he wrote in various editions. And this is, again, why I'm making this video about how to add a lot of depth and comprehensiveness to your library, because we all know about his major plays, but also, you know, Salome, Vera or the Nihilists, the Duchess of Padua, Florentine Tragedy, and Les Cent Courtisanes. These were earlier plays, although a Florentine Tragedy, for example, I think was posthumously published. It's just a very short, almost fragment of a play, although some critics have argued that it is a complete work in and of itself. But those lesser, earlier plays are not generally published in like the Penguin collected plays. This has, of course, the picture of Dorian Gray, Happy Prince and Other Tales, Lord Arthur Saville's Crime and Other Stories, A House of Pomegranates, and then all of the poems. So it's really fantastic. It literally cost €2 at a random market. I've used this massively to reread the stories, for example, but also to read the lesser plays and some of the lesser known poems. So this is indispensable. It literally cost me €2. Next, we've got 2 matching volumes here. These 2 massive doorstoppers. I got rid of the dust jackets because they were really faded and moth-eaten. I've got W. Somerset Maugham and Graham Greene. So again, these were both dirt cheap, and again, they both have books by these authors that are pretty much no longer in print. So of course, from W. Somerset Maugham, books like Cakes and Ale, The Painted Veil I've got in the vintage Red Spine Classics, but The Razor's Edge, Theatre, The Moon and Sixpence, these are lesser works by W. Somerset Maugham. And now I've got them all in one volume for like the price of the McDonald's cheeseburger and way more nutrition. Yeah, and then the Graham Greene one. I have actually read directly out of this one as well, because let's have a look. So Brighton Rock, The End of the Affair, and Our Man in Havana. These 3 are definitely available in other editions. I read Brighton Rock in one of the old Penguin editions a couple of years ago, but It's a Battlefield and England Made Me. These are Greene's 2 least read novels, by his own admission, the 2 novels that really didn't have good sales at all, and in a time in his life when he was a father of 2 young kids and just trying to make it as a writer, and he sort of found himself enmeshed in these kind of really dire, bleak, introspective, cynical novels that didn't have good sales and didn't really connect with the wider reading public, and are pretty much out of print or hard to get hold of. So yeah, so I read those, for example. Well, the most recent one I read was It's a Battlefield. I read this directly from the omnibus. Even though it's a bit unwieldy, you could, you know, shatter your eye socket if you drop it on yourself while reading in bed. But it's worth the risk, because It's a Battlefield, as tepid as the novel really was, I probably would never come across it if I didn't have this omnibus edition. So these first 5 were dirt cheap and contained a lot of works that are out of print or very hard to get hold of. Fantastic stuff. The next 5 are a bit more on the Lux side of things, but hey, it's good to know that someone still believes in publishing omnibuses, and this is the Penguin Deluxe edition of the shorter novels of John Steinbeck. So, of course, Of Mice and Men, Cannery Row, and Tortilla Flat, but also The Moon is Down, The Red Pony, and The Pearl. The Pearl I read for the first time when I was a teenager, about 13 or 14, and when I saw that it was included in the shorter novels of John Steinbeck, it was a wonderful opportunity to reread The Pearl, to reread Of Mice and Men. It's got lovely deckled edges, lovely big floppy, and very accessible, nice big print. Then I've got this Faber and Faber collected poems of Wallace Stevens. This is, not the most affordable edition. I always like to show the books that I bought in my time in Paris at the Shakespeare and Company. I spent a year and a half living in France, and many countless weekends in Paris on my own, wandering around, writing in cafes, to use the phrasing of my friend Emily Clarice Pessoa. I will link her channel. She's an amazing YouTuber as well. She said, I spent my 20s vagabonding around Europe, and that is pretty much what I did as well. And one of the highlights of my 20s was that year and a half that I spent living in France, in a small village about an hour outside of Paris. So I spent many weekends wandering around Paris on my own, buying books, reading in cafes, writing in sun-dappled parks in the summer. It completely went on a tangent there, I do apologize. What I was saying is that Wallace Stevens, the collected poems, this one I did buy in Paris, as you saw there. And Wallace Stevens, considering that he's such a canonical force, whether you agree with that or not, I appreciate his sort of influence. I appreciate what he brought to poetry, but I'm not in love with the work of Wallace Stevens, and also don't think that he was really the most likable person, but nonetheless, he has influenced many future generations of writers, and therefore, if you want to have a deep understanding of the American poetic tradition and the Western canon at large, you've got to get into a bit of the modernist that is Wallace Stevens. And considering that impact that he's had, there's not that much of his work available in print. They have this, stately collected poems from Faber and Faber. Faber also has, I think, a selected poems. I think there's 7 in here in total, 7 books in here. There's Harmonium, starting in 1923 was his first, and then all the way through to his last collection, which was The Rock, 1954. I'm not sure if the Auroras of Autumn, for example, or Transport to Summer if those individual volumes are still in print. They probably are, but they're probably quite pricey. So even though this was a bit of an investment, 7 books in one. So for me, it was worth it. So talking about stately, the last 3 I'm going to show you are, really the definition of stately volumes. This is the kind of investment that you make for life, really. These books will last a long time, and I will pass them down to my son, hopefully. And they were worth the investment, but even though they are expensive, because they contain several books within one, they still actually work out to save you money rather than trying to track down all of these individual volumes. And again, some of them are out of print or hard to find. And these are the beautiful Library of America omnibus editions, just gorgeous. They've done hundreds of these. I have several others as well, like for example the James Baldwin Library of America edition, which I've talked about quite extensively on my channel. But I'm going to go through these 3 with you. Joan Didion, this is her novels and her reportage from the 60s and 70s. So Run River, which was her first novel, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, Play It As It Lays, Book of Common Prayer, and The White Album, one of her most famous books. Run River was a pretty impressive debut. It's not the most memorable book of all time, but what a sort of way to kickstart your career. And then Slouching Towards Bethlehem just gorgeous. And then the White Album is really also her very authoritative, immersive, journalistic, literary, non-fiction writing. And then it's, going on, the 80s and the 90s. This is now obviously mature Didion. Salvador, Democracy, Miami, After Henry, and The Last Thing He Wanted. I haven't really talked about Didion that much on my channel, but I'm coming around to it. This is a good starting point. Very happy to have these. And then we'll finish off with Philip Roth in the Library of America edition. This is the Zuckerman Bound, so it's kind of themed novels around the Zuckerman novels of the character Nathan Zuckerman. The Ghostwriter, Zuckerman Unbound, The Anatomy Lesson, and The Prague Orgy. The Ghostwriter is one of my favorite novels. It's a kind of retelling of Anne Frank's story, but in this sort of potentially alternative universe in which she escapes and survives. And it's so beautifully done. And then you have the rest of the Zuckerman novels as well. I mean, as far as Roth goes, he's pretty unfashionable, but you don't have to like him. You don't have to like his ideas to appreciate his phenomenal prose, his phenomenal fiction writing. And The Ghostwriter, read this one first. Oh, that's another thing I wanted to say about these omnibuses, is that I'm the type of reader that I don't really jump around in books. I try to read a book from start to end, generally. Crazy as that sounds, some people read the last page first, or, jump around. I am somebody who reads from page 1 till the end, except when it comes to omnibuses. So with these omnibuses, sometimes I will read the books in order. That does happen, but it's not a priority for me. I do jump around a bit. So yeah, although these Library of America ones I've been reading in order. Wallace Stevens, I jumped around a bit, and Graham Greene as well. So yeah, with omnibuses I do jump around a bit, and sort of, I would literally turn green if I read all these 6 Graham Greene novels one after another. So I will read one novel in its entirety and then put it down, read other things, and then come back and read another. And yeah, Oscar Wilde as well, especially with the lesser plays. And also I'm not such a big fan of his fables like The Happy Prince and other stories, although I do love The Canterville Ghost and Lord Arthur Saville's Crime, very, very good. But with Oscar Wilde as well, and with Shakespeare, obviously you're not going to read the complete works of Shakespeare from page 1 to page 2000, right? So yeah, that was my 10 omnibuses that I wanted to share with you today. And like I said, that is a way in which you can build a deep, comprehensive, far-ranging library for relatively cheap. So yeah, let me know what you think of this video. Appreciate you watching to the end. And please let me know what you think about omnibuses and other ways that you might deepen your personal library. And yeah, see you guys all soon. Thanks so much for watching. Just cruising the streets of Paris. Very interesting attempt. Summertime.